certainly not a RICO enterprise. Shannon Stillwell, in associating himself with Jeffrey Williams and Trontavious Stevens and Clamarvius Nichols, his good friend, and Miles Farley and others, and Wooney Lee, he wasn't knowingly and willfully conspiring with anyone to participate in any enterprise aimed at a pattern of racketeering activity. He was in the mix. He was trying to make music. He was also, coincidentally, if we're being honest, he was selling drugs. He wasn't sharing with anyone. He wasn't sharing the profits. He was selling drugs and trying to make music. And he was around the right people to be trying to do that with. Because those connections were going to, in his mind, further his music career, which is what he wanted. And no overt acts were ever committed in furtherance of any conspiracy that Shannon Stillwell knowingly and willfully joined. The state has to prove every element of that charge beyond a reasonable doubt. They have failed. There is reasonable doubt. It's not true. And your verdict on count 1 must be not guilty. Let's talk about count 2. Just Kokomo, if you would pull up page 21. Actually, don't need to do that. Count 2 is the charge from January 10, 2015, murder of Donovan Thomas. Okay. But before we start talking about the evidence in the case, and we will, let's talk about music. Okay. We know that Shannon was working on music. I think we've made that clear through his phone, through the fact that he's always at the studio, through the fact that he had songs on his phone, multiple songs, some we've heard, some we haven't heard. Clearly, that's what he's doing in life. But we've also heard about drill music. We heard from Investigator Viverito. We heard from Antonio Sumlin. We heard from other people. We heard about the common themes of drill music, the things that make you marketable in that space. Okay. Violence, confrontation, having bodies, homicide, guns, more guns, bigger guns, being the toughest, being the baddest, not being scared, being a danger. Okay. And I'm not asking any of you to like that. I'm not suggesting I like that. Detective Underwood, she clearly didn't like it, and I'm not saying she's wrong. But it is what it is. That type of music exists. That type of music is popular, and that's the type of music that Shannon Stillwell was doing. We heard about the common terms in this drill music: ops, glizzy, blicky, red lights. And we heard 5 of Shannon's songs. We heard Slap Talk, Lizard Walk, Red Light, featuring B-Slime and Vito, Bull, S-H-I-T, with Dolly, Jeffrey's sister, and Ran This Money with Slime Life Shorty, a signed artist who had already made it, at least to a certain degree. And in those songs, I agree. We hear about all sorts of violence. We hear about red lights. We hear about glizzies, walking down, homicides, FNs. We hear it all. And out of context, it doesn't paint Shannon Stillwell in the best light. And I don't think I've ever claimed that Shannon Stillwell was an angel either. But it is art. And when he references beating a homicide, when he references beating a murder rap, when he keeps bringing up Donovan Thomas, it's not a confession. That's how he's known. That's what he's known for. That's his selling point in this type of music that celebrates it, much to some of our chagrin. It just is what it is. We saw a post that Shannon Stillwell made on January 27th.
Don't believe I said that, brother.
On page 24, Mr. Kokomo.
Damn. I still think I'd have said it.
And this is the untranslated version, but I'm not hiding from it. The translated version says peanut stone grade. But what does it say? I fell off 100 times. 100 times I bounced back. Life size. Hashtag life size lizard. Lizard, what he's rapping under. Lizard walk. Okay. And it says Manny Tumpa de Piedra. What's he talking about here?
I have no idea.
Times. Why does he keep referencing Donovan Thomas? Years later, he's already been arrested for this charge. Wouldn't he be quiet about it? He would if he did it. But why does he keep bringing up Donovan Thomas? Well, I have 2 things for you to consider. First, maybe, just maybe, on that particular day in June of 2022, Shannon Stillwell had enough. For 7 years, the police put a target on his back, and people had been shooting at him. He was shot at the Green Store. They shot at his head. He was so bold to go to JJ's Chicken and Fish to get himself some food with the mother of his child and another female who was driving. He was so bold to do that, that when they left that parking lot, 3 men in a car sped up behind him and shot at that car, riddling the back of that car with bullets, shooting poor Tierra Jones in the face, instantly killing the driver, Miss Jones, causing the car to careen and turn over and over and over, severely injuring Mr. Stillwell, scarring his head to this day, putting him in the hospital for months, putting the mother of his child in the hospital for a month. And then, when the police come to talk to Mr. Stillwell, remember what he does? He feels bad about the situation. He feels awful. He asks the officer, can I write a letter of remorse to Tierra Jones's family? And he does. And then the officer says, well, can you talk to me about the case? And know what he does? he talks to the officers about the case, and he gives names. He gives names of the people that he feels were in that car, that red car that sped up behind him, tried to kill him, and killed Tierra Jones. He gave up those names. And what was his reward? Page 26. I spoke about. I think it was Investigator Griffin, I think is the investigator that was investigating that case. What did he tell you? The discovery got out. It was posted online. And the fact that Shannon Stillwell had dared talk to the police to try to help solve the senseless murder of an innocent woman was broadcast on Instagram and social media. And people were chastising Shannon Stillwell and coming at him on social media and in real life over the fact that he made such a ridiculous decision as to try to bring justice to Tierra Jones' family. That was his reward for that. So yeah, people shooting at his head, narrowly missing at the Green Store. People shooting at him in a car, killing someone in the car and putting him in the hospital. People chastising him online for being so bold to tell the police what happened, who killed Tierra Jones, poor Tierra Jones. So yeah, maybe in January 2022, just maybe, possibly, he had enough. He was sick of the nonsense. If you want to say it, then I'll be it. You keep putting me down 100 times, you're making me fall, and I keep getting back up. And what's it all, ultimately, what's the origin story of it all? The death of Donovan Thomas. That's how it started. It doesn't mean he did it. That's how it started. That's why he has that target on his back. There's another possibility as well. Mr. Stillwell is just a kid who was raised by his grandmother in Thomasville. Nothing more, nothing less. But all of a sudden, he was known as a tough guy behind this. Wasn't true, but that was the public perception. That was the persona that was thrust on him. And maybe, while he was sick of it, sick of being shot at, sick of being chastised, sick of being threatened, maybe also a calculation was made. You know what? If they're going to keep shooting at me, I might as well lean into this a little bit. That does have traction in the streets. That does have traction in the music industry. Maybe that's why he's hashtagging his rap name in the post. The bottom line is, yes, I acknowledge he's referencing Donovan Thomas in songs. He's not giving any inside information in these songs that wasn't publicly known. Remember, he had been arrested. He did it prelims. He knows what the case is about. He's heard testimony about the case by the time he's making his songs. So he's not sharing any information that only the killer would know. Of course he's not, because he's not the killer. But maybe he is leaning into the bad boy image a little bit. But here's the thing. You might like my explanation or not. But could you put on 27, please? So let's just think. If songs were confessions, what would that really mean? Could you put on 28? Remember that song, Homicide by Lil Woody, Kenneth Copeland? Who played the role of the assassin? Threat, Trevante Turner. You watched the video. I don't think we need to watch it again. Who gets killed? Someone who looks like Donovan Thomas. Who put money on his head? Kenneth Copeland. If songs are confessions, then Kenneth Copeland is confessed. He hasn't been charged. He's not sitting here on this indictment. So maybe songs are just songs, and posts are just posts. So let's talk about Donovan Thomas and some of the evidence in this case. Eyewitnesses. Who did we hear from? We heard from Reginald Hendricks. He was a gentleman that was shot. He was standing near Donovan Thomas. He didn't identify anyone. We heard from two witnesses, two people that were in the barbershop, working in the barbershop. They heard shots. They ducked. They described what happened afterwards. No one identified anyone out of those two witnesses. We heard from a man named Sammy Davis, an older gentleman who lived across the street, who knew Donovan Thomas. They called him Car Wash. He watched Donovan Thomas's car. He didn't see anyone in the car. That was his testimony. Then we didn't hear from, but we heard about someone named Spencer Wright. Well, actually, we heard about someone named Nicholas Robinson. What did we hear about Nicholas Robinson? Investigator Thorpe talked about it, and definitely District Attorney Sprinkle talked about this as well. What did we hear about Nicholas Robinson? We heard about Nicholas Robinson in September of 2015. He was being arrested for felony theft and a probation matter. And when he's being arrested, and when I say he's being arrested by the Atlanta Police Department by an officer, and he's hours away from having, what I like to talk about, the Fulton County Blues. He's hours away from having that blue jumpsuit on, right? And what did we learn that Nicholas Robinson did? He said, "Whoa, you guys arrested me. I want to go talk to a detective about a case." So they take him to Thorpe. He wanted to talk to him about the Donovan Thomas homicide. They take him to Thorpe, and Thorpe starts to interview him. Okay, and Nicholas Robinson claims he's at the scene, and starts talking to Investigator Thorpe about what he saw. And that would be hearsay to talk about because he didn't testify. But we also heard that in the middle of that interview, Lieutenant Gaither was there. And she's doing research into the background of this Nicholas Robinson. What does Lieutenant Gaither realize? Wait a second. This man who's saying his name is Nicholas Robinson, this man is telling Detective Thorpe his name is Nicholas Robinson, his name is actually Spencer Wright. So she goes and tells Thorpe. And what does Thorpe do? He's interviewing someone about what they allegedly saw in this high-profile case, and this person has just lied to him about his name. What does Thorpe do? He continues to interview him. And then the very next day, he goes out and takes warrants on 4 people, including my client. Then we hear about DA Sprinkle taking over this case in the investigation in early 2016, and him seeing this mention of this Nicholas Robinson, who was really Spencer Wright, and where he said he was when he witnessed events. And we hear about DA Sprinkle getting surveillance and checking into it and talking to Spencer Wright. Where did you say you were? On what bench? Where? Circle it on his picture.
All right, back.
And about how he
Hope I didn't miss
look
nothing.
at the surveillance himself. And what did he see? An empty bench. Spencer Wright not only lied about his name, but he lied about a lot more. But know who he duped? Detective Thorpe.
Yes. Who was that? Squirrel
We'll get
Brain?
back to Spencer Wright in a minute.
Was he Squirrel Brain or
no
Dennis?
From the
I
Donovan
can't
Thomas case,
remember.
no DNA or fingerprints. We have an infinity.
One of them
which
was.
We'll talk about in a minute as well. But essentially, this Donovan Thomas case comes down to two witnesses. And in my opening,
Squirrel
I warned
Brain.
you all
That's
about
pretty funny.
people wearing the Fulton County Blues. That was the theme of my opening.
Yeah.
Because as it's played out, it turns out Rice Street is disgusting, horrible.
It's
You can
bad.
lock up anywhere.
It's really bad.
And there are people
Yeah.
who will lie on other people to stay out of Rice Street. You don't believe me? Spencer Wright, Nicholas Robinson. He's the proof of concept right there. Getting locked up, wants to talk to the detective, and then completely makes things up. And the next day, warrants are being signed. This is not some theory that I have that people lie to get themselves out of trouble. It's proven. Spencer Wright did it. He's not the only one who did it. So the state has these two witnesses, Darius Zachary and Kenneth Copeland. Those are the two witnesses. And I've been doing this long enough. They're horrible witnesses. They're liars. They have every reason to lie. They have every motivation to lie. They are inconsistent. They tell different stories every time they talk about the things they talk about. The state knows they're horrible witnesses. But here's what happens. In closing, the state says, they're not our witnesses. We didn't choose those witnesses. Shannon Stillwell's friends. He chose those witnesses. That's their line. They might not use it now because I already said it. But that's their line. But let's think about that for a second. That's not their witnesses. First of all, they're the ones that called them to the stand. But that's not their witnesses. Look at this indictment. 28 names. Darius Zachary? Is he on this indictment? Nope. Kenneth Copeland? Is he on this indictment? Nope. Are any of us going to really sit here and pretend that if the state was really being honest about who to charge about the events in 2015, 2014, 2015, that Kenneth Copeland wouldn't be on that indictment? Kenneth Copeland was a one-man crime wave in 2014, 2015.
He did them crimes. He did them crimes.
Darius Zachary was right in the middle, the impetus for one of the overt acts, the April 28th, 2015 shooting of houses. He's right in the middle of this. And they're not on the indictment? And we're supposed to pretend that the state aren't the ones that chose Kenneth Copeland and Darius Zachary as their witnesses? Of course they did. Of course they did. And why did they choose them? What are the qualifications that Kenneth Copeland
Wasn't one of them
Zachary
stooping someone
when it really comes down
in the
two
investigation?
people that are willing to lie on others to get themselves out of trouble.
Garlington or whatever her name was.
And two, they are two people that happen to put themselves in situations, serious situations, that would require them to lie on others to get themselves out of trouble. Those were their two qualifications. And the state said, sounds good. We'll sign you up. You're our witnesses. You're our witnesses.
Yeah, that's about how it works. I used to, man, I used to hate having to get people to snitch on co-defendants or whatever, but you know, they ask. So you know, it is what it is. But it happens a lot.
They go to Rice Street. That's extreme. He's told us, I would do anything to stay out of jail. I would lie on anyone to get myself out of trouble. He has his own term for what he does, the finesse. He really hates jail. What else do we know about Kenneth Copeland? Well, we know about, I'm going to ask y'all to think back and remember this when he was on the stand. A case, 21 CP 197618, State of Georgia versus Kenneth Copeland. Remember that? When he was actually in jail and he picked up another charge because he claimed that a jail worker attacked him and sprayed him with OC spray for no good cause. And he brought charges or tried to bring charges against this poor jail worker. What do we know? The surveillance from the jail was pulled. The investigators looked at it, as they should. Even Kenneth Copeland, a known liar, when he makes allegations against the police, yes, it should be looked into. And it was. And what did they find? No OC spray was emitted. In fact, the officer that was accused didn't even have OC spray on them at the time. So what happened to Kenneth Copeland in that case? Well, he was charged with false statement and false report of a crime.
Y'all ever seen him on that show on YouTube or whatever where he meets all these women?
So as a result of
his first statement is, I smoke crack.
False statement and false report of a crime. And it's pending.
The guy's funny.
Then all of a sudden, as this case is ramping up,
He'll make
Mr.
money.
Copeland's going to have to take a stand and be.
He'll make a lot of money.
And his prior lies. All of a sudden, on January 18, 2024, Fine Willis and her employee, Kenneth Hutcherson,
Fanny Fatterson,
dismissed the case against Kenneth Copeland. The case of false statement, a case of false report of a crime. Why?
That's an easy case.
Was it oh, we actually looked at the video again and it was open? No.
Excuse me.
Was it the victim didn't want to prosecute? No. Prosecutorial discretion. They decided
Yeah,
in their
I hate
best interest
that.
to dismiss that case against Kenneth Copeland before he testified. Remember I told Kenneth Copeland about it? I thought he was going to get up and hug me. He said, my case is dismissed? Yep, sure was. State took care of you. You're not on this indictment either. Kenneth Copeland's a liar. He's a proven liar. And let's talk about his prior statements he made, because we know on June 10, 2015 is when he said Demekion Garlington gave him certain information and that Shannon Stillwell was one of the people responsible for killing Donovan Thomas. Demekion told him at McDonald's. That's what Kenneth Copeland said on June 10, 2015. Well, we learned that Kenneth Copeland actually met with the police in 2015 4 times prior to that June 10, 2015 interview. We learned that he met with investigator Thorpe on January 11th. Now, mind you, all these meetings, presumably, if it were true, Kenneth Copeland would have that knowledge of what Demekion Garlington said to him for all these meetings. January 11, 2015, he goes in to talk to Thorpe. Doesn't say anything about Demekion Garlington telling him that Shannon Stillwell was involved in Donovan Thomas's murder. Places himself at the Green Store, which is less than a minute away from the scene of the Donovan Thomas murder. And he's asked about, specifically by Detective Thorpe, if he's ever rented or driven an Infiniti. And what does Kenneth Copeland say? No, never. Denies it completely. That's on January 11th. That's the night going to the morning after of the Donovan Thomas homicide. And of course, we know that's a lie because Kenneth Copeland was in the Infiniti on the night of January 9th.
Reckon it, if I'm not mistaken.
Right off the bat to Detective Thorpe. January 28th, he meets with Thorpe, Dennis, and Gaither. Again, never mentions this supposed statement by Demekion.
Dennis, that's what it was. I think it was Dennis.
In fact, he's asked specifically who he thought killed Donovan Thomas. He mentions his friend Doc and goes back and forth about whether Doc could have done it or not. He shares a theory about Donovan Thomas running off with someone's drugs. He shares a theory about Kelvin Watts robbing people and Donovan Thomas being caught in that situation. And he's also asked on January 28th about a rumor that he stole Donovan Thomas's chain. And what's he say? Oh, no, I didn't do that. Someone else apparently stole Donovan Thomas' chain, and they brought it to me, and I realized it was Donovan Thomas' stuff, and I returned it. I don't have any problems with Donovan Thomas. Me and Donovan Thomas are cool. He also said that on the 11th. So then we go to February 20th, the third statement he gave. Again, never mentions anything about what Demekion Garlington supposedly told him. And investigator Curry, asked him about the Donovan Thomas case. Doesn't know anything. And then on February 21st, with Gaither and Thorpe, he's again asked about the Donovan Thomas case. Never mentions, oh, Demekion Garlington at McDonald's told me that Shannon Stillwell did it. Again, he's asked about Donovan Thomas's chain. And it's another lie. Oh, well, someone brought it to me. He sticks with that lie. Lie after lie after lie. Denying beef with Donovan Thomas, denying stealing Donovan Thomas's chain, denying ever being in an Infiniti. But those are the statements that Kenneth Copeland gave leading up to June 10, 2015. Could you put on page 33, Mr. Kokomo? So this is a picture from June 10, 2015 that's in evidence, and it is misleading. It shows Mr. Copeland wearing street clothes, civilian clothes, not a blue jumpsuit, but let's not get confused, let's not get it twisted. On June 10, 2015,
he in jail.
Kenneth Copeland, for the first time, was headed to jail for serious charges. That's what's different about this interview. He was headed to Rice Street. He had a gun charge from the Dunbar Rec Center. Remember when he brought the stick into the rec center and left it on the bleachers? He had just been arrested on that warrant from when he did that. And when they arrested him on the warrant, they came into his girlfriend Deshaun Quarterman's apartment. And what did they find? They find another gun, a stolen Smith & Wesson, in Deshaun's kitchen. And they find a stolen MacBook in Deshaun's apartment. And they find stolen IDs and stolen property in Deshaun's car. And so now we got 2 guns, stolen property. Oh, and then the police are saying, oh, this stolen property, it's linked to auto breakings that have happened in your neighborhood. So he's got guns, and he's got a federal agent in there as well, Agent Cunningham, who's talking about these cases going federal. He's got a lot going on. And promises are made. Well, let's talk about the threats first. And all these officers say, oh, I wouldn't threaten him. I wouldn't threaten him. I threaten no bodily harm on him. I'm going to tell you, Max Sharp said this here today. Y'all threaten to punch me in the face anytime, but don't threaten to put me in prison for 25 years, no parole. That's a real threat that gets my attention. You can punch me. But the state and the police act like statements that Agent Cunningham made, like, you're an arbitrary criminal. We got you dead to rights. You're facing 15 plus 10. That's 25. No parole. You're not going to get out till you're 48. And that's not even including the conspiracies. You won't see your children till you're 48. That's a threat. That's a lot more bigger threat than I'm going to punch you in the face or we're going to beat you until you confess. That's a threat. What else did they say? It's totally up to you if these case charges go federal or not. You have to help yourself.
Yeah, they don't get immunity from the
feds. And they're
feds
going to ask me, what did he do to help
at
himself?
all.
You see what goes on here? This is
At all.
This is the playbook. Get the liar.
Man,
Get
it
him jammed
is
up, threaten him.
5:30
tell him
Central,
he's not gonna see his kids again
and this is
48.
still going on.
And then, oh,
Man.
maybe we can do something for you. You just give us
Nuts.
what we want. And yes, that was enough to make self-admitted liar, self-admitted finesser, A person who fully admits that he would lie on anyone to get out of jail, to stay out of jail, to
We
get out
got
of
a
trouble.
ways to
That was
go.
enough to coax him to make
Man.
up a story about Shannon Stillwell and others.
We got a
And that
ways
was
to
actually
go.
enough to put his plan in motion because he knew someone was going to have to back up his story. And that was enough to have him reach out to Demekion Garlington and try to get Demekion Garlington to go out and go on with the story, which of course, Mr. Copeland told us he's no longer friends with Mr. Garlington because Mr. Garlington would not go along with that story. Or he's upset with Mr. Garlington because Mr. Garlington would not go along with that story. Maybe you say, Max, we get it. He's a liar. He was jammed up. But maybe this threat of prosecution was what was needed to bring out the truth. Maybe he was being truthful on June 10, 2015. So let's think about what else he said on June 10, 2015. Remember when they were talking about those auto breakings that they suspected him of? And said, you're going to have to answer these auto breakings. Why do you have all this property in these cars? We know you're involved. Remember what he said? Nah, that was Lil Mike and Quez that did them. Remember the detectives? They looked at each other, Lil Mike and Quez, Lil Mike and Quez.
Who the hell's that?
In the cross-examination of Kenneth Copeland. Little Mike and Quez,
Man.
not only did they not do the auto breakings that Kenneth Copeland claimed they did on June 10, 2015, Little Mike and Quez, they don't exist. He made them up on the spot, June 10th of 2015. So my answer to you,
Mike and Queso did.
To finally be truthful? Nope. He was lying. He made up people that didn't exist in this very state.
Oh, love it.
To take as truthful from one of the biggest liars we've ever seen.
The two women get there. Oh, they got to conspire. What do we do? What do we do now? I don't know what we do.
And what did
our case has just gone to shit.
From the Fayette County Jail on December 21st, 2022, a recorded call that Attorney Steele brought out.
And I did it.
I did it.
I got to do it. I lied to it because I found out I can't say that. I can't say that on the phone, but you know what I mean? It's some shit happened between me and him back then. And just so happened, I got a lot of mistake. You feel me?
He admitted. He said, I lied on Thug. The very same interview, he was saying all sorts of things about Thug. He admitted he was lying. He was making stuff up to get himself out of trouble, to get out of his situation. He got caught on a recorded line saying as much. Ladies and gentlemen, Detective Thorpe fell for the finesse. Kenneth Copeland said it was easy. Lieutenant Gaither fell for the finesse. The police department fell for the finesse. Kenneth Copeland got up on the stand and explained the finesse to you, to your faces. We know better than to fall for Kenneth Copeland's finesse. We know better than to just accept his words. Ms. Kokomo, on page 36. This is the other state's witness, the other witness that they chose to bring in front of you, Quindarius Zachary. And yes, he's wearing the jail blues, and he had every reason to lie to get himself out of trouble. First of all, what did Quindarius Zachary say at trial? He admitted that he lied on Shannon in two prior statements, one August 5th, 2015 to Lieutenant Gaither, and then one in a proffer session on March 3rd of 2017. And he also admitted on cross-examination that even those two statements, those two lies he told about Shannon Stillwell, were not even consistent with each other. But none of the police seemed to mind. None of the prosecutors seemed to mind. Why? Remember his lie? His lie was, oh, the night of the Donovan Thomas killing, Shannon Stillwell confessed to me at Jeffrey Williams' condo. And then he also went on to lie about Shannon Stillwell on his August 5th, 2015 statement, lied about Shannon Stillwell's involvement in really a bunch of other cases that Shannon Stillwell has never been charged with. He just lied on Shannon. And he admitted his motivation for lying on Shannon. He admitted that he knew, or he was under the belief, that when he talked to the police, when he talked to Lieutenant Gaither, first of all, he needed to get bond. He had been locked up for about 7 days. His family had been calling Gaither. We heard about that, begging her to go up and talk to him. What was the urgency? Well, we didn't get into details, but we learned that Mr. Zachary has a serious illness that he wasn't going to fare well at Rice Street under those conditions. So he needed to get out. So he has people calling Gaither, come see me, I want to talk to you. And then he also has the motivation of the April 28, 2015 case, which he was facing at this time. He told you, I was under the impression, and I didn't do the math, this may be right, this may be wrong, but this was his impression, that he was facing something like 185 years. Yeah, that's pretty good motivation to lie. Demekion Garlington, because Demekion had told the police about the April 28, 2015 incident. And he figured blaming Shannon for things was a way to get back at Demekion, because at that time, Demekion and Shannon were close friends. So those were his motivations. Let's talk about the statements he gave. we heard about investigator Gaither being called repeatedly to go down there to talk to him on August 5th, 2015. And she said, okay, remember, he wanted to talk about other stuff. He didn't want to talk about his case. He wanted to immediately get to the point where he's telling lies on other people to get bond or get released, get consideration. And Gaither, to her credit, said, no, we got to talk about your case first. Let's talk about April 28th, 2015. And what he said, I wasn't there. I wasn't there. The only reason I know about it is because Demekion Garlington told me the next day. So immediately, he's lying to the police, saying he wasn't there, which of course we know he was there. Lieutenant Gaither knows he was there. But what's his explanation? It's odd. It's interesting. It seems to be a recurring theme. I wasn't there, but, and where did he say was also? I was at home because I'm always sick, right? I was at home. I'm always sick. I wasn't there. And the only reason I know about this is because Demekion Garlington the next day confessed to me. Seeing a pattern? Everyone's always confessing to Quindarius Zachary, according to Quindarius Zachary. Of course, that was a lie. Demekion Garlington had not confessed to him. That was made up. He made up a story about someone confessing to him. And in fact, he was there. Gaither called him on it. He about 2 or 3 times said, I swear I'm telling the truth. I swear, I swear, I swear. And finally he gave up the lie. And then he proceeded to move on to other cases and make up lies on Shannon. March 3rd, 2017 was the second statement set up by his lawyers. You got to understand what the proper session is. It was a session for him to give as much information as he could about as many instances as he could. And the DAs were in the room. They can consider the information given, and then they can give any consideration that they deem appropriate to Quindarius Zachary for his assistance in providing information. Those were the 2 statements. But here's the thing. You know, it's not complicated to keep a story straight if it's the truth. But if you're making up lies, the context, the details tend to change. It's a little bit more difficult to keep everything straight. And I think about
Max is good, man.
You know, I think about
Max is good.
I saw a space shuttle explode on TV when I was sitting in the classroom watching it take off.
1986.
I remember exactly where I was. I remember who was sitting next to me. I remember.
I was at home watching.
I remember what grade I was in.
Will
I remember
no.
when my favorite
Price
football
is
team
Right.
first won their Super Bowl in my lifetime. I remember everything about that. I remember who the announcers were. I remember who won the MVP. I remember what room I was watching the game in. I remember who I was watching the game with. I remember when this country elected their first black president, our first black president. I remember who I was watching TV with that night, the emotions, what room I was in, what channel I was watching. I remember even silly things. I remember watching the Oscars.
Oh,
seeing a man
come on.
run up on another man and slap him in the face.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember it, but I don't remember what the hell I was doing.
In our old house, while she talked on the phone with her sister. I remember those details, those things that are etched into my mind. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, if a friend of mine came up to me in real life, like this, if it really happened, if a friend of mine came up to me and said, Max, I have something to tell you. Earlier tonight, I murdered one of the most powerful gang members in all of Atlanta. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that I would remember exactly where I was when he said it. I would know exactly what was going on, where we were, who else was there, and what exactly was said. Because that's the type of thing you wouldn't forget. That's the type of thing you wouldn't forget details of. But what do we know about Quindarius Zachary's renditions of this alleged confession by Shannon Stillwell? It changed. It changed from August 5th, 2015 to March 3rd of 2017. On August 5th, 2015, he claimed that Shannon Stillwell confessed, but just said, we caught nut down bad. On August 5th, 2015, he said, we caught nut down bad. And then, according to Mr. Zachary, on August 5th, 2015, Shannon Stillwell also named 3 other individuals in the car. That was his statement on August 5th, 2015. And then on March 3rd, 2017, he's asked about the same alleged confession. And it's, oh, Shannon just told me he caught nut down bad. And he didn't give me any other details at all. Didn't say anyone else who was in the car. What about the timing of the confession? On August 5th, 2015, Quindarius Zachary claims the confession occurred just as he and Muntung pulled up to Jeffrey's condo. And Shannon was about to go to a girl's house. And we crossed paths, and he confessed to me. On March 3rd, 2017, what was the story? No, Shannon wasn't there when I arrived at the Sky House. Shannon didn't show up till later that night, till about 4 or 5 a.m. He was dropped off by some girls. I know because I let him into the condo. How do those details change about something that would stick in your mind if it were true? And the answer is because it's not true. Because it was a story that was made up by Quindarius Zachary, who was facing 185 years, who needed to get out of jail because he had a serious illness, who knew that the gun he had been arrested with was going to be linked to other crimes. And just like Kenneth Copeland, he was someone that was willing to lie to get himself out of trouble. And at that particular time, the state, the investigators, and everyone else had enough leverage on him to force him to make that decision to lie on someone else to save himself. It's a sick game. It is a sick, sick game. So we got these 2 liars who were strategically interviewed at the very time they're most likely to lie. Wouldn't it be cool if we had some corroboration of what these 2 no liars claim? Phone records the state has repeatedly claimed that there's some corroboration in these phone records, and I give Agent Bernie some credit. That was the FBI cast agent that talks about phone records and plots them. He was very careful. He was very clear. This does not give exact locations. First of all, it's just devices, not people, but it doesn't give exact locations. It doesn't tell you where people were. It gives a general area. It tells you what cell phone may have been closest to the device when it was being used. And these cell phone towers have all different radiuses and all different signal strengths. So you just get a general idea. You got to be very careful about what you read into these cell phone records. That's what he said, the expert. And yes, he talked about different people calling different people that know each other calling different people on January 10, 2015. Shouldn't be that surprising. And yeah, he put Kenneth Copeland, as did 88 Sprinkle, Kenneth Copeland at the Green Store, in the general area of the Green Store around the time of the homicide. The Green Store that is what? A minute away from the barbershop? What did the phone records corroborate again? That Kenneth Copeland was right there at the time of the murder? That people were generally going north and south on the highway? What did they say about Shannon Stillwell? Where did they say he was? Go look at those phone records. Did they provide any cell phone records for Shannon Stillwell? How about Diamante Kendrick? What is the power of those cell phone records again? What did they corroborate? Did they have Kenneth Copeland wear a wire? Remember when he was so desperate to get out of jail? I'll wear a wire. That would have been an idea. Prove what you're saying, Kenneth. Don't just, you're a liar. You're a known liar. Don't just tell us stuff. Prove it. Nope, they didn't put a wire on Kenneth. What about wiretapping phones? We know they know how to do that. Did they wiretap anyone's phone to corroborate anything Kenneth Copeland and Quindarius Zachary said? Nope. So then we get to surveillance video. And this is where this gets kind of ugly. Kenneth Copeland claims he was at the Green Store, not outside the barbershop at the time of the killing. And his phone records put him in that general area. How many times have myself or Attorney Steele asked about the Green Store? Detective Thorpe claims that he went to the Green Store to try to get surveillance, but he didn't think they had any. Really? Because I heard about my client being shot at, his head being shot at that very same Green Store, and I heard the officer responded and looked at the surveillance to determine who was shooting at my client. I've seen pictures of the Green Store. I see the cameras. They don't have surveillance. Okay, Detective Thorpe. So you try to get surveillance. Do you have that in any of your reports? Any documentation of you going to the Green Store to try to get surveillance to corroborate the claims of Kenneth Copeland? Oh, no, that's not in my report. Ask Gaither, Lieutenant Gaither, about the Green Store. Why would I go to the Green Store? That's not even relevant. Really? I beg to differ. She had no interest in corroborating Kenneth Copeland. So then we talk about the McDonald's surveillance. The McDonald's at Old Hateville and Cleveland Avenue, the very spot where Kenneth Copeland claims in his story that everyone met and that Demekion Garlington told him who killed Donovan Thomas. Well, we know the McDonald's has surveillance. That's been testified to by several officers. And we know we don't have the McDonald's surveillance for January 10th, 2015. So I ask, Attorney Steele asks, I ask, other attorneys ask. First we ask Gaither, did you ever try to get surveillance to McDonald's? And what did she say? Oh, we went like 2 or 3 months later, we went and we talked to a general manager and they weren't able to get into the cameras right then, but we took the card and we gave the card to Thorpe. That was her explanation of the efforts to get camera footage from McDonald's. I said, okay, do you have that in a report that you drove down to McDonald's and talked to? Who was the person you talked to? What was their title? What was their name? Where's the card? Oh, no, I don't have that in a report. Nope. Okay, so then we asked Thorpe, what did you do to get surveillance from McDonald's to corroborate anything Kenneth Copeland said? And this is where it gets ugly. He said, I went a couple days later and I talked to the people and they said the footage had been erased. The 15-day or however many days the cycle is ended and all the footage was erased and it started all over again. That piqued our interest because everyone knows that's not the way surveillance cameras work. Everyone knows it's first in, first out on a rolling basis, meaning if it's a 15-day cycle, at the end of 15 days, everything isn't just erased, but it starts taping over the beginning parts again, so you always have 15 days memory. Everyone knows that you wouldn't go to the McDonald's 2 days after an incident and find out that the whole system had been erased, because that's not how surveillance systems work. And we asked every officer, it seemed, that came up here, you ever hear of a surveillance system working that way?
I used to work crime scene, and crime scene. That's exactly what happens. It's first in, first out. It's different digitally. It's a little different, but the same thing with video cassettes. You pull a 12-hour tape, and I don't know, a week later they put it back in to reuse it and recycle it. And I mean, you got to record 12 hours to lose all the data. So if hour number 11 was where you had the data, but you've only recorded over the first two, and you could still save it. And the same thing with computers. So that was the dumbest. That was some of the dumbest testimony I'd heard during this thing. Oh Lord, DA Sprinkles. Sprinkles. It sounds like a cat's name. Sprinkles the cat. Yeah. They lied. Where is Sprinkles? Sprinkles, come back, Sprinkles. Right here. This is ridiculous. Lil Woody. Is it Lil Woody? Uh-oh. Here we go. Dang, imagine that. Oh, I did these crimes. Odd looking with hair. Just let me go home so I can have toilet paper. I just want to take a dump in private. Oh, man. And wrecked by Lil Woody. Lil Woody can't drive nothing. Wrecks everything he drives. Who has a name Rich Homie Quan? That shit don't even make sense. God, they need to come up with better nicknames. All right, Max, come on, wrap it up. I'm getting tired. ADD is kicking in. You're going to lose the jury. Wrap it up, man. Wrap it up. Man, you got to wrap it up, man. Everybody's falling asleep. That was my hint. Yeah, we're gonna take a break. I'm gonna take a break too.
Thank you. All right, go ahead, Mr. Sharp.
Thank you, Madam Police Court. I see the coffee. I can take a hint. We're almost there. Okay. We're gonna move on to the Shamel Drinks murder from March 14th, 2022. And there are several counts regarding this case. Count 49 charges my client, Mr. Stillwell, with murder. Mr. Kokomo, if you could show 50. 50 charges participation in criminal street gang activity based on the murder. 51 charges criminal street gang activity based on murder. And 52 charges possession of firearm by a convicted felon for March 14th, 2022, based on the belief that if a murder was committed by Mr. Stillwell, he must have had a gun. And count 54 is charged possession of firearm during commission of a felony, being the murder. My point is all of these counts are predicated on the murder charge. And so I'm not going to focus on any of the other counts. I'm just going to focus on count 49, which is the murder charge. Okay, so turning the page to the March 14th, 2022 Shamel Drinks murder case. Let's start out by just reviewing kind of the basic evidence, standard evidence, and then we're going to get into some of the more complicated matters that came up during trial. There's no eyewitnesses. There's no DNA. There's a fingerprint that was briefly alluded to that was found on Shamel Drinks' car that does not belong to Mr. Stillwell or anyone else in this case. There's no ballistic matches. We know that the projectiles or the bullets that hit Mr. Drinks twice, once in the neck, once in the arm, we know that they were 40 caliber bullets. Okay, that's what we know. What else have we heard through trial? We heard about a phone that Mr. Stillwell had. We heard a lot of his songs off that phone, and we also heard about some other things. We heard about a article that Mr. Stillwell or someone with Mr. Stillwell's phone, we'll say Mr. Stillwell, clicked on March 17th, 2022. Okay, it was a Fox News article about a shooting on Windsor Street. Okay, that's 3 days after the homicide. That is after Mr. Stillwell's girlfriend at the time, Miss Alexander, alerted him to the fact that there was a shooting on Windsor Street. It's after the fact, it's after she sent a post posted by someone else on Instagram about this shooting on Windsor Street. It's after his grandmother, Miss Jackson, reached out to him to check if he was okay because she saw the news report about this shooting on the news. All that happened on the evening of March 14th. That's how quickly news traveled. It should be of no surprise that by March 17th, probably sooner than that, there was an article about this incident on the internet, on the Fox News website, the local Fox 5 website. Mr. Stillwell clicked on an article 3 days afterwards. Additionally, we heard about Mr. Stillwell being in we know that he's in the rap, or he's trying to make his way in the rap game. And we know that on the evening of March 14th, going into March 15th, Mr. Stillwell was in the studio. And we know there was a note in his phone that talked about a very standard, very common, not a particular unique line at all, not unique at all, to be quite honest, from drill music, about ops. That was put in his notes while he was in the studio making drill music. So we have that. Neither of those two things in his phone are particularly noteworthy. They're not strong evidence of anything, but they were brought to your attention by Investigator Viverito, who searched his phone far and wide for any information she could find, and that was what she found. We heard about social media posts, and we heard that those social media posts were collected by Investigator Viverito, and we went back and forth with Investigator Viverito, we being me, about her work collecting those posts. There's no reports on who she was following, what she was looking for, who she was checking out on Instagram, who she wasn't checking out on Instagram. We also know from the post by Mr. Nichols that was presented to you initially in a far different form than it was actually on the internet, that Investigator Viverito was not only collecting posts, but she was manipulating posts to present to you in the way that she deemed fit because she is biased. We learned that there were several people that made posts about what the goings-ons in March of 2022. We know, and I'm not going to hide from it, that Mr. Stillwell made posts about Maine Christian McMiller's death on March 11th, about Darius Ford's death, about how his heart is broken, about how he ain't going to be the only one crying. We know that there were posts on both sides from everyone in the community about what was going on in March 2022. But the takeaway from the post is this, and it actually came from Investigator Viverito. I don't think she really wanted to admit it, but she did. We talked to her about the March 11th killing of Christian McMiller and Darius Ford and about that investigation. Now we're talking about 2 years and 8 months ago now, how it remains unsolved, how no one's been charged. Okay. And we look at some of the posts that were made in reference to that incident. We learned about a Big Nick who posted just after that incident, slime and chalk. And we know what that, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. And we know about these other accounts. Edgewood, I think it was Edgewood James and Joey Hurst, 2 other accounts that weren't necessarily their names, may have been kind of like pseudo accounts or fictitious accounts, celebrating in really the most vile ways possible, celebrating the deaths of Christian McMiller and Darius Ford. And I asked Investigator Viverito, and she confirmed, even if they're fictitious accounts, you can see who was posting, you can pull IP address, you can try to look into that and figure out who was posting. If you really thought that these posts, if you really thought posting about the crime was a confession to murder. And she agreed, she could, but they didn't, because it's not. We learned about Kelvin Watts, also known as Shell Cow. And we saw the post that he made right after the murder of the double homicide of Christian McMiller and Darius Ford, about him putting 2 shells under Donovan Thomas's eyes, about him looking in the camera and putting 2 shells under his eyes, 4 different posts. Another post about with 2 shells and lips sealed. And we talked to Investigator Viverito about what those shells meant. And they meant bodies in her estimation. So Kelvin Watts is sitting there posting, putting symbols of dead bodies under his own eyes in his own way with the shells. And I asked Investigator Viverito, oh, and he also made a song. We heard about the song he made, Mafia Story, where he's celebrating the death, where he's describing the death, how they were in a fast car, and how they died on the freeway. Direct references to the death of Christian McMiller and Darius Ford. And so I asked Investigator Viverito, all these posts that Kelvin Watts has made, has he been charged? And the answer was no. And why was the answer no? Because posts on the internet about the death of people, even claims of responsibility, such as putting two shells under your own eyes, that's not enough to charge someone. That's not a confession. Investigator Viverito said the reality is, in this day and age, under these circumstances, dealing in this situation with the drill music and everything else, there's false claiming going on all the time. We can't go by what's on the internet. We can't go by what people post. That's not a confession. That's what we learned from Investigator Viverito. That's what she was forced to concede when we talked about the Christian McMiller and Darius Ford deaths. So when we're analyzing crude, inappropriate, idiotic posts that are made by Demekion Garlington, or even my client, Mr. Stillwell, let's keep that in mind. Those aren't confessions. Those are posts, and they're common. And even Investigator Viverito, who I have maintained pretty clearly is not an honest broker, was biased, even she had to admit that. Ballistics is interesting because we know about the FN that Mr. Stillwell is allegedly linked with, 5-7 FN. And that was always a hole in the state's case, right? Mr. Drinks was shot with a .40 caliber bullets. Mr. Stillwell has never been linked to any weapon that shoots .40 caliber bullets, at least not in 2022. So Investigator Viverito shows up in court, looking to put her stamp on the case, looking to sway the jurors. And she looks at a video and she says, yeah, on that table, I think that's a Glock 27 based on the bottom of the grip. I'm not an expert. I'm not saying it is, but I'm just going to kind of hypothesize in front of the jury that it's a Glock 27 and they shoot .40 caliber bullets. Okay, you're not an expert, but you're throwing that in front of the jury. Never said it before until you're on the stand. And what's your experience with Glock 27s? Well, one time I went to the gun store and I was trying to decide what kind of gun to buy, and I held a Glock 27. That's it. Think about Investigator Viverito and her bias and her trying to sway you and identify or claim to identify a firearm and make it model from that picture and what her basis is, what her real basis is. Any evidence that Mr. Stillwell ever possessed that gun? And what did she say? She just can't answer no, because of course there's no evidence that Mr. Stillwell ever possessed that gun. She said, well, do you have any evidence? Or I don't have any evidence that he didn't. Well, geez, that's an interesting shifting of the burden of proof from the state's witness. She's biased. She came in there to try to solve the key problem of the state's case, which is that Mr. Stillwell is not linked to any weapon that could possibly shoot the fatal bullets in the Shamel Drinks case. And she tried to solve that problem for the state with her little trick and her little identification based on one-time handling a gun in some pawn shop or some gun store somewhere. Don't fall for it. It just shows her bias. So we heard the wiretaps. State brought on the wiretaps. And yes, the wiretaps do show Mr. Stillwell. We heard a call, Mr. Stillwell laughing about sneaking out when the police showed up and talking about taking a stick and his FN from the house after the police showed up. We own that. We acknowledge that. Neither of those guns could shoot the bullets that killed Mr. Drinks. But there was another wiretap that was played that I'd like us to just hear again. And Mr. Kokomo, you know where I'm going? Okay. It was from a call on April 1st, 12:29 a.m. And the state made such a big deal of this. Of course, the wiretap, hold on one second, just don't play it. The state made a big deal of this because it's a wiretap. Demekion Garlington's on one end on his cell phone. And the state made such a big deal about Mr. Stillwell, what he was doing on this call on April 1st. Of course, we know he was in jail. He'd been arrested on March 17th, so he's in jail, and he's talking to Demikion Garlington. And they make a big deal. He's on a contraband phone. He's on a contraband phone. I'm not saying that's right, but let's think about that scenario for a second. We've been sitting here for a year listening to the same. This call is subject to being recorded, right? Every time someone comes from the jail, because it is recorded. Mr. Stillwell's on a cell phone. He doesn't know Mr. Garlington's phone is tapped. Mr. Garlington doesn't know his phone is tapped. As far as they're concerned, they're having a private conversation. They have cut out the recording and are having a private conversation about March 14th, 2022. And what do they say? First, Mr. Coco, 239 to 310.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's what I'm telling folks. I'm like, kind of like shit with the head, they locked up for like, they saying like, you know, like, but they good. I'm like, they gonna assume some shit like that anyway. They gonna assume that like, oh, like, I mean, they ain't kill him. So
That's why I keep telling look, I keep telling him like, just chill. Like, I know. This ain't nothing. Yeah, I'm like, this ain't nothing, bro. Like, they just doing that because it seems like goddamn gas. It's like, just chill. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In this private conversation that they're having, they're not saying, oh, how can we cover this up? Oh, I think they're onto us. Oh, no, I think they got us. They're saying, we didn't do anything. They're just assuming we did stuff because we're at the gas station, which is a fact that we have never denied. They were, in fact, at the gas station. They're having a private conversation, and they're talking about how innocent they are and how the police got it wrong. And Mr. Stillwell is just saying, let's let it work itself out. So let's go to 1210 to 1225, Mr. Coco. Thank you.
I already know, like, when they got down, go to wiping down, don't got down, you know, like gunpowder for rings, all this shit up.
Yeah.
You don't come back clean. You see what I'm saying? So I ain't tripping on that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, let's consider that comment. First of all, no one said the car has been cleaned. It's going to come back clean, is what was said. And now, listen to what Mr. Stillwell says. Once a GD going to wipe it down, doing GD, you know, the gunpowder forensic, all that S-H-I-T, the gunpowder forensic. Does Mr. Stillwell sound like an expert in gunshot residue there? Does he really sound like someone that's going to say, oh, I have so much inside knowledge on this forensic work that the police do on the inside of cars that we must clean the headliner of all things? No, he sounds like someone who knows that they were in a car on March 14th, 2022, knows that they were at the BP, knows that they left and they drove down Windsor Street, and knows, despite the fact that he's been arrested falsely for killing another gentleman, he knows in his heart that no gun was fired by him inside that car or outside that car. That's how he knows it's going to come back clean. It's not some devious mastermind that's got some inside information on forensic work. He barely knows what he's talking about. You know that gunpowder forensic, all that S-H-I-T. That's a comment of someone that knows where they were on March 14th and where they were driving and what they did not do. And what they did not do was fire a gun. Let's talk about the rental car. State made a big deal of this rental car. Yes, Mr. Stillwell rented a car on March 14th, 2022. First of all, we've seen the BP tape. There was no plan, okay? This was a chance encounter. It was unforeseen that Shamel Drinks would ever show up at a gas station. So there's no indication that people would be renting a car in anticipation of running into Shamel Drinks, okay? The reality is we heard about what was going on in Mr. Stillwell's life. We know from his phone, we heard from Ms. Alexander who testified. Remember what she said? March 9th, I was robbed. I said she's in the cash business. She said, no, I dance. Okay, that's fine. I didn't want to put it out there, but she did. She dances. She carries large amounts of money. And people ran up on her with their guns out and tried to rob her. Remember what she said? I said, you shot at them in self-defense. She said, no, I shot them. She didn't have any remorse about that because people ran up on her to try to take her stuff at gunpoint. But she was concerned about the blowback. She was concerned about people coming back to get her. Couple that with the fact that Mr. Stillwell has had a target on his back since 2015. Couple that with the fact that Mr. Ford and Mr. McMillan were just ruthlessly murdered on the freeway while driving in a car that obviously someone knew who they were and had an idea of what kind of car they were in. Is it really any wonder why a car was rented by Mr. Stillwell and Miss Alexander on March 14th? If it's such a secret, if it was such a plan behind this car, isn't it odd that Mr. Stillwell, first of all, they ordered it online ahead of time. Mr. Stillwell walks in there on surveillance, gives his ID, gives his name. It wasn't no secret. They were renting a car because things had gotten dangerous. They were trying to survive. And then we make a big deal of these tints. Yeah, they did put a tint on the car. That was kind of the point. That was exactly the point. No one's hiding from that. Mr. Stillwell was scared for his safety. He was scared for Miss Alexander's safety. And the first thing he did that night is went and got window tints on the car. And yes, he broke the rental agreement in doing so. We acknowledge that as well. If this was a car that was involved in a homicide on March 14th, I don't know. It seems logical to me that if I'm in a rental car and I use it as part of a homicide, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of said rental car, distance myself from the rental car. It's on video at the DP. It's on video on Windsor Street. There's surveillance cameras all over the place in Atlanta. The first thing anyone would do if they committed a crime as heinous as this in a rental car is get rid of it. Well, what do we know that Mr. Stillwell does? Well, first of all, he runs into Investigator Viverito at 2830 Waters Road a day after the homicide, wearing the same clothes he was wearing in the BP, by the way, not really concealing his identity there. And he tells Investigator Viverito, yeah, that's the car I'm in. That's the car I'm riding in. And then what does he do later in the day on the 16th? Does he go into Griffin, Georgia and burn it in some back road somewhere? Does he go drop it off in Alabama? No. He calls Alamo and extends the rental until the 20th. Ask yourselves, really? Are those the actions of someone with a guilty conscience? Are those the actions of someone who committed a crime in a rental car? Absolutely not. Why is he doing these things? Because just like how he knows the car's going to come back clean, he knows
It's the actions of a retard if he did it.
No reason to get rid of the car. Okay, let's talk about Dr. Melissa Sims Stanley. She was the medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Shamel Drakes. She was very important. We didn't realize how important she was at the time, but she was very important. She testified that there were 2 wounds to Mr. Drakes, one to his arm and one to his neck. We don't know which order they came in, but we know the shot to the neck was the fatal injury. It caused a massive injury to the base of his skull and the base of his brain. Dr. Sims Stanley testified about the effects of such an injury. Death would be immediate, and if not immediate, imminent. But more importantly, conscious control of bodily movements would be immediately lost due to this massive injury to the base of the brain. The ability to move body parts up and down would be immediately lost. That came out in her testimony. Now, the state followed up and said, is it possible, if Mr. Drakes' foot was already on the brake when he was shot, is it possible for his foot to remain on the brake? And Dr. Sims Stanley's answer was yes. And of course it is, because staying on the brake does not require any conscious bodily movement. But on cross, I asked a very simple question. Is it possible, after being shot, that Mr. Drakes to actively move his foot up and down off the brake? And unequivocally, with no hesitation, Dr. Sims Stanley said, no, that would not be possible. It would not.
No, what would happen on an immediate CNS wound, your body locks up. It's death man's grip. That's the first thing they do is turn into as stiff as a board. No way. He wouldn't have moved it. He pushed the brake down.
He took out warrants without ever having watched the video in this case, the FedEx video. He relied on a FedEx employee to describe it to him. We also know that he didn't wait for any gunshot residue results to come back before taking out warrants either, before assuming the guilt of my client, Mr. Stillwell. He, in fact, when he testified, he seemed unaware that there was even any gunshot residue tests performed or anything had been collected. But then we talked to Antoinette Green, who was the crime scene tech, who processed the the white Audi. And she processed the red Versa, but she processed the white Audi. And she informed us that it was, in fact, Detective Hogan who requested that she collect the headliner for the purpose of testing for gunshot residue. And I asked crime scene tech Green, did that seem like an appropriate request to you, collecting the headliner to test for gunshot residue within that car? And she said, yes. The location seemed appropriate. The location of the headliner seemed appropriate. And the fabric that the headliner was made of made it a very appropriate piece of the car to collect to be later tested for gunshot residue. And so she collected it. In fact, she didn't just collect the part over the sunroof. She cut out around that part as well and collected it all and sealed it up just like she does in every other case. She did her job. She collected it. She sealed it. And she sent it to GBI for testing. I asked the scientist, Mr. Colvin, who tested for gunshot residue. I said, well, how about you? What is your thoughts? You ever test headliners before? Yeah, all the time. Okay, does that seem an appropriate part of the car to collect to test for gunshot residue? Absolutely. The fabric is a type of fabric that would tend to hold on to the gunshot residue, to maintain a gunshot residue as opposed to someone's hands or something like that. And also the location is very appropriate. So we heard what Mr. Colvin did. We heard about his process, which is all by the books, all by procedure, how he dabbed that headliner. And he didn't just use one tab, he used 2. And he dabbed that headliner again and again and again until one tab lost stickiness, and then he moved to the other tab and continued to dab. And what is he dabbing for? Microscopic particles of gunshot residue that are emitted from a gun when it is fired. And he takes these tabs that he's been dabbing on a headliner, and then he looks at it under a microscope, under an electron beam, to look for microscopic particles.
I have done GSR testing, and that should, the first time you have an explosion off from gunpowder, it goes into a plume, just poof. You should, and within less than 12 inches, you can determine how far someone is. But they have chemical tests too that'll tell you whether or not there's GSR. You wouldn't necessarily always use a microscope. I don't know. That's bizarre.
There are many emitted from a gun when it is fired. A plume of them are emitted from the gun when it is fired.
That's correct.
And he looked under that electron microscope, and his results were negative. And what does negative mean? Negative doesn't mean
No, you wouldn't have found it.
Or anything like that. Negative means 0. 0 particles collected off that headliner that was collected from the white Audi.
And it wasn't where they may have shot the gun outside the car.
Of course, we're going to talk about the video. The video that Investigator Viverito couldn't wait to talk about when she was on the stand, and I wanted to ask her questions about other things. The video that Detective Hogan had not watched at the time that he took out warrants for my client. Mr. Kokomo, could you pull up the video? Okay. And I just want to give a little timeline of what I submit we're going to see from this video. We're going to see 3 cars in a line. We're going to see a 4th car, a white car, pull up behind Mr. Stillwell and driving fast. We're going to see Mr. Stillwell pull off. 16 seconds later, we're going to see Mr. Drink's brake lights go on and off. 16 seconds after Mr. Stillwell has been long gone. 18 seconds after Mr. Stillwell leaves, we're going to see a 5th car make an unexplained U-turn. 30 seconds after Mr. Stillwell has pulled off, we're going to see Mr. Drink's brake lights flicker on and off again. And finally, for a 3rd time, 33 seconds after Mr. Stillwell has pulled off, we're going to see Mr. Drink's brake lights go on and off once again. Investigator Viverito wasn't correct. It doesn't happen one time. The brakes go on and off 3 different times in this video. So we're going to watch. Pause. Okay, right here, we have 3 cars lined up. Mr. Drink's red Versa on the left, Mr. Stillwell in the white Audi in the middle, and Mr. Nichols and Mr. Boyer, according to the state, and Mr. Farley in the right. I invite you when you're deliberating. I invite you right now when you're deliberating later on. If you need to review this video, you can look as many times as you want. I want you to look to see if you see a muzzle flash at any time when Mr. Stillwell's car is next to Mr. Drink's. We see a 4th car speed up behind Mr. Stillwell. And Mr. Stillwell leaves. What's going through Mr. Stillwell's mind right now? Is it that common theme of drill music that he knows about, Red Light? Is it Future's song, Red Light? Yeah, and this shit real out here, running through the red light, looking through your rear view, and might just sneak up on the car and try to spray you? Is that what's going on in Mr. Stillwell's mind? Is that what he's thinking about as he sees this 4th car speed up behind him? Or maybe he's thinking about that night, September 26, 2015, when he was in that car with Tierra Jones in Miss Duncan, and that car sped up behind him and started spraying the car they were in through the rear windshield. Either way, Mr. Stillwell gets on. Mr. Nichols, apparently confused, is trying to figure out what's going on, and he eventually leaves as well. Okay, pause. Okay. That 4th car, not Mr. Stillwell's car, that 4th car that has never been identified, has never been tested for gunshot residue, is now next to Mr. Drink's. And there's a 5th car driving up the street, driving up Windsor Street. Let's see what happens. Stop. Okay, back it up, Mr. Couple more seconds. Okay, pause. Okay, I want you to look closely. Right here, we're going to see the 5th car make a sudden U-turn. Is there someone in the street? Is there someone waiting at that car to make that U-turn? Is there an obstruction? Is there anything going on that would explain why that car makes that U-turn at that exact time? No, there's not. There's one explanation. Hold on, Mr. Kokomo. There's one explanation only. That car hears a gunshot. And while that car makes a U-turn, I want you to look at Mr. Drink's brake lights. They flicker on and off. That means he's not dead. He has not been shot in the neck yet. That's science. That's from Dr. Sim Stanley herself. What could be happening, I submit to you, because we don't know the order of the wounds. What could be happening, what makes the most sense, is that at this exact moment, that car that's next to Mr. Drink's fires a shot into the car. Remember, there's 2 wounds to Mr. Drink's, but there's really 3 shots, because one projectile ends up going into his arm and it's on a seat and is collected by Miss Green, CST Green. Another projectile ends up sadly in his body and is collected by the ME. A 3rd projectile goes through Mr. Drink's car because we see the exit wound, where the bullet exited Mr. Drink's driver's side front door. So there's at least 3 shots that are fired into Mr. Drink's car. I submit to you at this exact moment, first shot is being fired. That car hears it, is making a U-turn, and Mr. Drink's is trying to react, perhaps moving around, going up and down off the brake, trying to figure out what's going on, perhaps trying to find a firearm that he has in his car, trying to figure out what's going on, as he's certainly not anticipating or expecting to be shot at that exact moment. That car, that white car, remains next to Mr. Drink's. Up. Back it up, Mr. Kokomo. And before he leaves, we see a slight flicker of the brake light right there. And then if we play it, again, and no more flickers. At that moment, tragically, the fatal shot was fired from that fourth car into Mr. Drinks' red Versa, going into his neck, causing him to immediately lose all bodily control and eventually leading to his imminent death. And that white car, that fourth car, leaves the scene. That last brake light flicker was 34 seconds after Mr. Stillwell had already left. It is scientifically impossible that Mr. Stillwell killed Mr. Drinks. Couple that with the gunshot residue test that proves that a gun was not fired from the car. Couple that with Mr. Stillwell's behavior, him not distancing himself from the car, but extending his rental. Couple that with the call that we heard on the wiretap of him and Mr. Garlington speaking candidly, talking about how the police are just making an assumption that they know they did nothing to Mr. Drinks. This case is clear. Mr. Stillwell, as convenient as it is, for this inconvenient as it is for the state to admit it, he didn't kill Mr. Drinks. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to conclude. For nearly a decade, the prosecution, the police, the gang investigators, they have focused on this group of people, Jeffrey Williams, Shannon Stillwell, and many others. They're young men that grew up in hard times and had dreams of their own. They saw something different in Mr. Williams, a confidence, an ability to turn negative to positive, like so many hip-hop artists before him. They were attracted to Mr. Williams. They identified with him, but they also saw opportunity to chase their own dreams, to get in the studio, to make connections, to hopefully make it big. And it worked out for some of them. Mooney Lee is now a signed artist. He's not alone. But for nearly a decade, these gentlemen have been followed on social media. Prosecutors and police officers have listened to their music, have scrutinized their artistic expression, leaving no room for artistic license, leaving no room for hyperbole. They've searched residences. They've taken jewelry. They've seized cars. They've subpoenaed phone records. They've taken people's cell phones. They've extracted the contents of those cell phones. They've tapped phones. And most egregiously, they have systematically sought out people that are so weak, so scared of jail, so scared of the consequences of their own action, that they are willing to lie on others to save their own skin. And they have systematically sought out those people, and systematically sought out those people at the very time when those people were in crisis. And they've made threats to those people about how they're going to be locked up for decades, not get out till they're 48 years old. And they've made implicit promises to those people. Help me, help you. You're a small fish. We're interested in the big fish. I'll be on the phone with the DA as soon as we are done. This ain't 68 plus 1. I'm not going to do you and you owe me one. It don't work like that. You have to give information. You're an armed career criminal. You're going away for 25 years, no parole. It's all up to you. They're going to ask, what did he do to help himself out? That's the game, the sick game that has been played, that's built this case from its inception. It needs to stop. For over a year, the prosecutors and gang investigators in this case have had their hammer out, trying to bang that square peg, their evidence, into that round hole, which is their narrative. And it still doesn't fit. It never will fit. The album cover that they tried to bang on and make it be a gang declaration of war, it never was, it never will be. That video of Antonio Sledge that they claim is an overt act, that they wouldn't, where Antonio Sledge is threatening another man because they're both having sex with the same lady, and he's upset and he's in his emotions. Remember that? How they wouldn't let Antonio Sledge enter a guilty plea. They wouldn't let him go home to his sick mother, go home to his kids, until he signed the plea deal that said that somehow that this is gang related, just banging, trying to make it fit. Of course it wasn't gang related. They're both having relations with the same girl. It was over a girl. It had nothing to do with gangs. But they tried to make it fit. 24M on N's head. They say it's putting money on someone's head, ordering an assassination, and they bang and try to make it fit. Of course it had nothing to do with that. We all know what that was about. And the gang investigators do it too. No rules, no initiation.
24 million on a head. Who puts a diamond in their forehead?
Letting whoever wants to be part of the group in on their own terms, out on their own terms, worldwide, people identifying with YSL, and they bang and try to make it something it's not, and label it a hybrid gang. Think about the FedEx video. How many different versions did we hear? How many different hypotheticals from the state? Oh, no muzzle flash, must have been shot inside the car. Oh, well, no GSR, must be shot from outside the car. Oh, well, the windows were just tinted, can't roll down the window, must have opened the door. Oh, no GSR, must have been cleaned. Oh, no evidence of it being cleaned, must have been vacuumed. Oh, or maybe scientist Colvin with the GBI, maybe he tested it incorrectly. Maybe he only dabbed on certain parts that didn't have GSR, as if GSR all accumulates in one of those spots, as if it's not a plume, as if it's not all over an object where it's shot. These are all their theories that they try to use. Oh, the GSR must have fallen off in the bag, the sealed bag, the bag that was sealed and protected from the elements, just like every other piece of evidence they use in prosecutions of other cases. Just throwing stuff out there, just continue to try to bang, 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 bang. Just make it fit, make it look good. It's never going to fit because it's not the truth. They don't have an explanation of why that car did a U-turn. There's only one logical explanation. They don't have an explanation for that negative GSR test. They don't have an explanation of why their own witness, a doctor, the ME, said that upon that shot, all bodily control would be lost. And we see the brake light go on and off 3 times after Shannon Stillwell's gone. They don't have explanations, but they just want to bang, 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 and try so hard to make it fit. I've had enough of the hammering. I've had enough of the square peg. I've had enough of their narrative and their theory. It's been a year. It's time to put the hammer down. Let's follow the evidence and not the state's narrative. If we follow the real evidence in this case, not what they're trying to sell you, you will come to the conclusion that the state has not proven count 1, conspiracy to violate the RICO Act beyond a reasonable doubt, and you will return the only just verdict in that case and find Mr. Stillwell not guilty. If we follow the evidence and not the narrative about count 2, Donovan Thomas, you will find that the testimony, the uncorroborated testimony of admitted liar Kenneth Copeland and admitted liar Quindarius Zachary is woefully insufficient. That there's reasonable doubt all over the place, and you will find Mr. Stillwell not guilty, count 2. If we follow the evidence, you will find that not only has the state not proven that that Shannon Stillwell shot Shamel Drinks, not only have they not proven that beyond a reasonable doubt, but it's crystal clear that Mr. Stillwell did not commit that crime. And the only just verdict for counts 49 through 54 will be not guilty. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your time and attention.
Council, approach real fast for me. All right, trying to figure out timing. I know y'all were told that this might be a late day, and it's going to be a late day. We're going to hear from Mr. Weinstein. We'll have a quick break, and then we'll hear the state's close, and then we'll be done for the day. We'll come back tomorrow and get the instructions. All right, go ahead, Ms. Weinstein.
Good afternoon. I'm Doug Weinstein, as you all know, and I have the pleasure of representing Diamante Kendrick, along with my co-counsel, Katie Hingerty, who's sitting back there right now. Mr. J. App also represents Mr. Kendrick, but he can't be here right now. And good afternoon, Your Honor, and good afternoon, Counsel. I am thrilled to finally be able to speak directly to you all. We've seen each other in the hallways, we've seen each other in the break room, and here in court, but I haven't been able to address you directly. The first thing I have to say is thank you. Thank you for your time over the last year. Thank you for your attention. It is sincerely appreciated. And I am going to do something that you have not seen much of. I am going to try to move at a brisk and deliberate pace and not take up any more of your time than I need to, because I think we have already taxed that enough at this point. I know that your time is valuable. I know you want to be able to spend the holidays with your family. I would also like Mr. Kendrick to be able to spend the holidays with his family without the weight of this trial hanging over him. So let's get a move on. You have heard a bit about Diamante Kendrick over the course of this trial. So I'm going to just talk about him for a few minutes. As you heard, Diamante, first of all, he originates from Miami. He came from Miami, he moved here, but he was a football star at Grady. And he had a scholarship to UGA to play football. That's a path out that a lot of people take. That is a path up. For a lot of folks in Diamante's situation, the path out is football, either as a career or as a scholarship opportunity to get a college education, to make a better life for yourself. And then another alternative is often music. And while he had that chance to go to UGA, it got derailed. And it got derailed through something that was at no point Mr. Kendrick's responsibility, but it got derailed. So he had to look for something else. And what did he look for? He looked for music. He turned to music because he didn't want to live in that life anymore. He wanted to move beyond it. But yeah, he made some mistakes back then. He made some mistakes back in 2015. And he has paid his price for that. He has paid his dues that he owed society for that. And since that time, he has done nothing but turn to his art, turn to his music, writing lyric after lyric after lyric, laying down tracks. But instead of allowing him to move on with his life, he has become sucked up in this targeting of Jeffrey Williams and has become collateral damage. And these attacks and use of his lyrics against him, the use of the lyrics against Jeffrey Williams, is frankly shameful. It's an attack on the First Amendment. And there's been so many rights, so many notions that I think we hold dear as a nation that the state has simply swept away. So why has the state taken a year of your life away from the work that you enjoy, the family that you love, your travel, your vacations, your children, grandchildren, parents? Why have they done that? What has been the point? The state told you in their opening that there was a point. And the point was that Jeffrey Williams was the head of a wolf pack. That is what they told you. But I don't think anyone sitting in here has seen that. You'll make that decision, not me. But I don't think anyone has seen that. What have they proven about Jeffrey Williams? They have proven that he was a man that through incredible hard work, dedication, and talent came up out of Cleveland Avenue. And instead of forgetting everyone back there, instead of leaving them behind, he tried to reach out to those people that were friends of his that he came up with and say, you don't have to live this life. You can come with me. You can get into music. You can hone your craft. I can take you on the road with me. I can take you out of this. And some people took advantage of that and pulled themselves out, took advantage of Jeffrey's help. Some people tried to do that and failed, and Jeffrey Williams sent them back home. They didn't succeed. And Mr. Kendrick took a hold of that. And Mr. Kendrick took advantage of that opportunity that Jeffrey helped him. But instead, law enforcement put a target on Jeffrey Williams' back. Because God forbid anybody pull themselves out of that. Because what does society want to do? Drag them back again. Never let them leave their past behind. God forbid someone leave that behind and pull themselves out up from their bootstraps. That's what we tell ourselves as a country. If you work hard enough, you can pull yourself out. Let's see what you guys say. So I would argue that we have not wasted your time here for a year. I'm going to argue that the state hasn't wasted your time, that this court hasn't wasted your time, and that we can salvage something out of this year that we have taken from you. And that is to send a message. And you're going to send the message by going in the back, looking at the evidence that's presented to you. And I think any review of that evidence would have you come back with findings of not guilty on all the charges against Mr. Kendrick. Diamante Kendrick is one of Jeffrey Williams' best friends. And as I said, he's a casualty of law enforcement's war on Jeffrey Williams. Mr. Kendrick is charged with racketeering, murder, and several other charges, about 4, all relating to drugs and guns that were found at Jeffrey Williams' house when Mr. Kendrick was over there visiting. What evidence, what testimony, what witnesses, what physical evidence has the state shown you that Mr. Kendrick committed these crimes? I would say almost nothing that you've seen in this courtroom. Sure, they've played some videotapes, but what have you seen from this witness stand? Nothing. When this case began, we stood up here in opening and we told you the state would not be able to present evidence against Mr. Kendrick. We told you they're not going to be able to show you guns tied to him, that there would not be ballistics tied to Mr. Kendrick. There wouldn't be fingerprints tied to Mr. Kendrick. There would not be witnesses putting Mr. Kendrick at the scenes of these crimes. There wouldn't be any video of Mr. Kendrick involved in the tragic murder of Donovan Thomas. We told you that this case was a Krispy Kreme donut hole. I think the phrase I might prefer is a nothing burger, but that's what we told you. That's what we promised you. And that is a bold promise for a defense attorney to make. And it's one you'll rarely hear, but we made you that promise. And we also told you what would happen, that the state was going to parade hundreds of witnesses through here to throw everything they could against the wall to see what would stick. And frankly, I would submit that nothing has stuck, that we have kept our promises to you. What did the state promise you? Again, a wolf pack with a ruthless wolf pack leader. It's late in the day. With a ruthless wolf pack leader that is here. And instead, you saw that man that wouldn't leave his friends behind. As the state has told you, as Mr. Sharp told you, the state has to prove these charges beyond a reasonable doubt. And they have to prove every element of these charges beyond a reasonable doubt. So let's just talk about reasonable doubt for a moment. So when the state began today, they told you that you don't have to seek out doubt. They don't want you to think about doubt. But the standard is they have to prove their case to you by guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They have to prove their state to you by guilt beyond a reasonable doubt for each of the charges, for each of the elements. It can't be down here as highly unlikely. It is a very high standard. Possibly guilty, probably guilty doesn't do it. It has to be guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The court is going to charge you. They're going to tell you, for example, that grave suspicion is not sufficient. And let me read you the charge you're going to hear. Facts and circumstances that merely place upon the defendant a grave suspicion of the crime charged, or that merely raises a speculation or conjecture of the defendant's guilt, are not sufficient to authorize a conviction of the defendant. Mr. Short, already explained so much about the evidence presented regarding the tragic killing of Donovan Thomas. And I need to start by saying I have deep, deep sympathy for the Thomas family. I cannot imagine what it must be like to lose a loved one to gun violence or any type of violence like that. I myself have 5 children, and just the thought of losing a child tears me up. So I don't know what they must be going through. But I think the evidence that has been shown to you does not demonstrate in any way that Mr. Kendrick is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the killing of Donovan Thomas. And as Mr. Sharp so ably demonstrated to you, I think that there are others whose perhaps guilt or responsibility for Donovan Thomas's death has been demonstrated far more than my client's alleged responsibility. Briefly, to not belabor the point that Mr. Sharp brought up, let's talk about Kenneth Copeland, Little Woody. He was a character, right? I mean, he sat in that witness box, and he's a charismatic fellow, a very interesting guy. And he has certainly made the most of his star turn in this courtroom. But he never testified on this stand that Diamante had anything to do with the killing of Donovan Thomas. He never testified on the stand that Demeke and Garlington told him all this stuff, that Kendrick was involved in killing Donovan Thomas. He didn't tell you anything about, at the McDonald's, he learned anything about the killing of Donovan Thomas that Diamante Kendrick was involved in. You didn't hear it at Sky House. You don't hear that from the stand from him. To the degree you heard any of that, it is in that June interrogation tape that was played to you. He was not under oath during that interrogation. And you heard the circumstances from Mr. Sharp, all the pressure that he was under. That was his 5th interrogation following the murder of Donovan Thomas, and the first time he comes up with this story clearly concocted by Demeke and Garlington. How'd you like the testimony of Demeke and Garlington? Well, you didn't hear any testimony from Demeke and Garlington. Everything Garlington allegedly said, you heard through other people. And again, why did he lie to police? To use Mr. Sharp's phrase, because I always steal from the best. He didn't want to wear the blue jumpsuit. He didn't want to go to Rice Street. He didn't want to be in the Fulton County Jail. He didn't want to face years of prison. He finessed the police. He finessed the police. He is a master liar. He is an admitted master liar. And he has methodologies he uses to lie and try to make it convincing. And he explained all of that to you. Again, why doesn't he want to go to Rice Street? Well, he told you what jail was like. On my cross, he explained what jail was like. When he most recently spent time in jail, he had a broken toilet full of feces. There were flies everywhere. He had no food to eat. He had to put his shirt over his face to act as a mask to try to keep the smell down. What rational person wouldn't do everything they can to avoid that? And of course, now is the next question. How do you know when to ever believe Kenneth Copeland? And I don't have a great answer for you on that. I can tell you what he said on the stand during my cross. You know, he said, hand to God, I am telling the truth now. I have God in my heart. I have God in my head. Now, the state would have you believe about Mr. Copeland and Mr. Zachary, who I'll address next, that they got on the stand and they lied here. And they lied here, I'm sure they're going to say, because they're afraid of the defendants. And that is why they lie. But I'm going to argue to you that actually they got on the stand here and they told the truth. And they did it really almost in an act of bravery, because when they get on the stand, the people they're afraid of is the state. They're afraid of the state. The state is the one that has the power to prosecute them. The state is the one that has the power to put them in prison. The state is the one that has the power to put Mr. Copeland in that jail cell with the non-working toilets and the feces and everything else that he is trying to avoid. But despite being afraid of the state, Mr. Copeland gets up here and tells you the truth. Quindarius Zachary, again, he lies to police. He lies to police repeatedly. And when I confronted him with those lies, why did you lie? You know, he said, Yak never told me nothing. Yak never showed me nothing but love. Never showed me nothing but love. But he lied on him anyway. And why did he lie? Because Garlington came to him with a play. And what's the play? The play is to blame other people for the death of Donovan Thomas. Who did Mr. Zachary see in that infinity? He never saw nobody in that infinity but Woody. The Texaco. Oh my gosh, there's the smoking gun. There's the smoking gun that shows that my client murdered Donovan Thomas. He's on video at a Texaco station a block away before the murder. Heaven forbid. He pulls up in that Texaco in a Pontiac. He leaves the Pontiac. He goes, you've seen this video 1,000 times. Well, maybe not that many, but it must feel like it. He leaves the Pontiac to go into the Texaco, and he buys some junk food in the Texaco, goes back into the Pontiac. He sits in the Pontiac. He talks to another car that pulls up. He gets back in the Pontiac, and he leaves in the Pontiac. Go in the back. Watch the video 1,001st time. You're never going to see him get in an infinity. You're never going to see it. How does he get in the infinity? Was there a witness that got up here and put him in the infinity? No. Do they have video from the surrounding area that shows him transferring into the infinity? No. I mean, presumably, he teleports into the infinity. I have no idea what their theory is going to be when they argue to you, but I'm going to be fascinated to hear it, because there's been no testimony about him in an infinity. How do we know it's an infinity in a drive-by? Well, the state is pretty sure it's an infinity. The state put on, this is one of my favorite experts of all of the state's experts, they put on an infinity identification expert who has worked with what, Infinity for years. And he can tell in any kind of grainy video that that car is an Infinity. That's an amazing expert, but I'll take his testimony. That's fine. I think he's right. I think it's an Infinity. And Mr. Kendrick is not in an Infinity. And it's pretty hard to do a drive-by shooting if you are not in the car that did the drive-by. It is absurd. So again, there's no eyewitness testimony of Mr. Kendrick involved in the shooting. No weapons tying Mr. Kendrick to it. No ballistics, no fingerprints, no gunpowder residue, no DNA, nothing that you would expect to see. Now, the state has told you, well, you can look at circumstantial evidence. This is true. You can. And the state put up a dollar bill with some puzzle pieces missing. So, well, you can kind of infer that that's a dollar bill. And that's true. But don't go try to spin that dollar bill anywhere, because that dollar bill will not spin. And this evidence is not sufficient to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. Where's the cell phone data? Oh my gosh, you poor folks. You had to spend days listening to experts come in here and talk to you about cell phone location data. Where was Mr. Kendrick's cell phone location data, putting him there? They didn't show you any. Who killed Donovan Thomas? I don't know who killed Donovan Thomas, but I think Mr. Sharp's theory has some merit. Let's turn to the allegations that YSL is a gang. The state had to bring in 5 different gang experts. You guys had to sit through 5 different gang experts to try to convince you that YSL is a gang. Now, they gave you the definition of a traditional gang, and these gang experts, who, as Mr. Sharp pointed out, all sit there and train each other in this insular little unit, but they told you, yeah, they're not a traditional gang. They don't meet the definition of a traditional gang. But lo and behold, we have another category of gang. It's a hybrid gang. Ooh, a hybrid gang. This is fascinating. Let's talk about hybrid gangs. What's a hybrid gang? Oh, a hybrid gang is whatever we say it is at any given point in time to fit our narrative. That's what a hybrid gang is. I use the term nose of wax. They can twist it any way they want to fit the group of people they want and say they're a hybrid gang. It's a catch-all. It's a catch-all used to throw all kinds of people together and say, well, you don't meet the definition of a gang, but because we are gang experts that train each other, we have decided you are a hybrid gang. Well, hybrid gang. So a hybrid gang apparently is one where, according to their experts, Bloods and Crips can live together in peace and harmony with each other to accomplish some type of goal. Does that make sense to anyone in here that has any basic understanding of the way that gangs work? You've had the state's own witnesses come here on the stand and talk about how ridiculous it is that you can say, that anyone can say, that YSL is a gang when you can have Bloods and Crips and Independents and all of these people be members of this alleged gang. As Mr. Sharp talked about, there's none of the traditional gang elements. There's no beating in. Anybody can call themselves a member of YSL. You know, someone, I guess, alleged there might be a $25 dues fee or something ridiculous to that effect. But there's nothing that shows them together as a gang. Oh, well, wait, they are a gang because look at these pictures of YSL wearing green clothing. That must mean they're a gang. You guys are mostly in blue and black. You associate with each other here today. Are you guys a gang? The state is all in red today. Are they a gang because they're all dressed in red? Poor Miss Hingerty happened to come in red today. I guess she's a member of the gang as well. It is absurd. Lil Wayne has ESPN on his arm. ESPN. I guess Lil Wayne is surprised that he's a member of YSL too. My client's got ESPN on his body. No, that can't be because he was a football star and in his mind probably liked ESPN. It must be because he's a member of a gang called YSL. So it's wonderful that the state's gang experts have such insights into the mental thinking of my client and Lil Wayne and everybody else. Now the state may say, well, they're not a gang, even though they all dress in red today, looking quite dapper. Because, well, they don't have some criminal objective. Well, I don't know. Let's look at the way the state indicts people. The state's around Investigator Viverito. Investigator Viverito is the last person I can find anywhere on video or that you've seen on video holding that missing $500,000 watch. Did she steal the watch? Was that an overt act and can further into the conspiracy? Maybe I should go to a grand jury and try to indict this. It's the state gang or something ludicrous like that. Everything gang investigators see is viewed from the viewpoint of it must be a gang. Mr. Kendrick, look at the photo they showed you of Mr. Kendrick in the bandana shirt. Go back and look at it in color. The gang investigator says it's red. It is orange. Orange as the sun. You look at it, you decide, don't take my word for it, don't take their word for it, don't take the state's word for it. Use your own eyes. But when you're a gang investigator, everything has to fit the narrative. And that's the narrative. The snake on Mr. Kendrick's chest. Did he get that snake because YSL is a gang? Or did he get that snake because it represents the tree of knowledge in the Adam and Eve story? Well, they can tell you. I saw a mentalist Saturday night at a show, and this mentalist was amazing. This mentalist, you would think of something, and the mentalist would tell you, oh my gosh, you're thinking of a number between 1 and 50, it's 47. It's actually quite impressive. Apparently, Investigator Viverito and these other gang experts are mentalists. Maybe they will be at the next fundraiser I go to. I'd like to see some more of their tricks. Mr. Kendrick does modeling shots. So someone will say to Mr. Kendrick, hey, hold this hat. Oh, that's gang. The hat has a rat with a line through it. That's gang activity. We're sending a message to everybody. There's a photo taken outside at the time of a video shoot for music. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Look at that. Gang activity. There's photos of Mr. Kendrick wearing clothes that say SLAT outside of a recording studio. More gang activity. More people trying to pull themselves out, get into music, exercise their First Amendment rights. More gang activity. It's just exhausting, folks. All right. The racketeering charge. Racketeering is very complicated, as you all know. And the state explained racketeering to you. So I'm not going to go into all of the details of what it takes for you guys to find racketeering. Although I do want to repeat, you have to find each of those elements beyond a reasonable doubt, and you're not going to be able to do that with Mr. Kendrick. So I only want to focus on a few parts. Just bear with me. It's late in the day. Late in the day. Just give me a little more time. A few parts of the racketeering charge. First of all, the state has not shown a conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt. What is a conspiracy? It is an understanding to accomplish or pursue a common criminal objective. Criminal. There's been no common criminal objective shown. What has been shown to you, and what was shown to you even earlier today? A series of independent, disparate acts over and over again. All kinds of different people committing criminal acts. I'm not going to argue to you that criminal acts were not committed, but they have not shown any relationship between these acts. They have not shown you anything that's shown it was done for a common criminal objective. That was not demonstrated. Again, as Mr. Shark said, when Mr. Stevens was here, Tick, and Mr. Stevens was talking about selling pot, he did that for his own benefit. He's not paying up the ladder. And by the way, there is no ladder. Investigator Viverito told you because this is a hybrid gang, there's no structure to it. So I don't know how Mr. Tick is supposed to, Mr. Stevens is supposed to spread the money around. But it doesn't matter. They're going to say there's a common criminal objective. Nothing has been shown. Tick. I have to go on a side note on Tick, Mr. Stevens. Mr. Kendrick, Mr. Williams, they were trying to avoid the fate of Mr. Stevens. Mr. Stevens, remember, I'd love you to go back and read his testimony. Remember, look at your notes. At the age of 11, society threw him away. They threw him away. They tossed him in juvie, where he learned about gangs and drugs and everything else. Threw his life away. And he's trying to get his life in order again. And he's dragged back into this. State says one of the objectives was money and power. Where's the money flowing? Where's the money? Where's the money coming in? The state had the power of the courts, their subpoena power. They could have gotten Jeffrey Williams' banking and financial records. They could have subpoenaed his accountants. They could have gotten all of that to see the money flowing. Did they do it? No. Why didn't they do it? Well, I'm going to argue to you they didn't do it because there was nothing there. If they did it, it would undercut their case about seizing Mr. Williams' assets, about seizing $8 million worth of jewelry that he earned in the music business, about seizing all of those cars, about seizing the ring off of his finger and keeping it. We don't want to see those records because we don't want evidence that he earned all of this from his music and his hard work. No efforts of money and power as part of a conspiracy deriving from this gang. The judge is going to tell you in your instructions, mere association with an enterprise is insufficient by itself to establish a conspiracy to violate the RICO Act. Mere association. And that's what you have here, mere association. A bunch of guys that grew up together, were around each other, and that some of whom were trying to make it out, and some of whom were trying to help others make it out. Mr. Kendrick was trying to make it out. Mr. Kendrick would not let himself be thrown away like happened to Mr. Stevens. So I don't believe there's a conspiracy that's been shown beyond a reasonable doubt. What else has the state not shown? Well, they've not shown a lot, but I'm just going to focus on a few. The state hasn't shown that Diamante Kendrick knowingly and willingly joined this conspiracy, and they must show that. Well, first of all, I understand their difficulty. I understand their problem. How do you show that you knowingly and willingly joined the conspiracy with a criminal purpose when one doesn't exist? So that's their first challenge. That's their first challenge. What did they do to try to show knowing and willing join? Well, he hung out with some guys that did some bad things. He allegedly is part of this YSL gang that's not a gang. And by the way, you heard testimony, Mr. Kendrick was signed to the YSL record label. So I guess he knowingly and willingly signed to the YSL record label, but that is not the same as knowingly and willingly joining a conspiracy. Depending on the outcome of this case, at least to this point, being signed to a record label, even a rap record label, is not a crime in the US. What else hasn't the state shown? They haven't shown a pattern of racketeering activity. And the key here is pattern. And part of the key to pattern is there has to be interrelatedness. And I'm sorry about the legalese, I promise I am, but I have to talk about it. These acts have to be interrelated. And instead, what you've seen for a year of your time is isolated incident after isolated incident. We're going to throw everything against the wall and hope something sticks. But even if a few things stick, if they're not interrelated, it is not a pattern. So I believe that when you look at all of the evidence, you're going to need to go back to the jury room. And I believe once you deliberate, you're going to find that Mr. Kendrick is not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of conspiracy to violate RICO. The last charges are easier to discuss and we'll go faster. Every counts 57, 58, 61, and 63. These are the last four counts against Mr. Kendrick. All of those relate or based upon drugs and guns found at Jeffrey Williams' house. Not a single witness, photograph, fingerprint, lab test, DNA, everything you can imagine. Nothing shows that Mr. Kendrick possessed any of those guns and drugs. Nothing. When they arrested Mr. Kendrick that day, did they test his clothing for any type of samples that there might be drugs or? No, nothing. You didn't see any of that. Why was he arrested? Why is he arrested for drugs and guns? It's merely his presence at Jeffrey Williams' house that day. The judge is also going to tell you this, and bear with me while I read this, because it's too long to memorize. You are not authorized to find a person who was merely present at the scene of the commission of a crime at the time was committed guilty of consent in and concurrence in the commission of the crime, unless the evidence shows beyond a reasonable doubt that such person committed the alleged crime, helped in the actual perpetration of the crime, or participated in the criminal endeavor. They're trying to show Mr. Kendrick guilty of those crimes just by being at Jeffrey Williams' house. I don't know about y'all, but when someone invites me over to their home, I do not ask before I go there, do you have drugs stashed away throughout your house? I do not ask before I go there, have you got a machine gun hidden under the couch in the basement? Have you got guns stashed in your cabinets? I don't ask that. And when I get to their house, I don't go looking for those things. Why did they charge him with this? Why did they charge Mr. Kendrick with this? Because, as I have told you, from what you could see in this courtroom, Mr. Kendrick has done nothing but work on his music, but they have to drag him in. They have to suck him in to this vortex caused by their relentless, ridiculous pursuit of Jeffrey Williams. It is offensive and it is absurd, and presumably they felt they needed to do it to help out on the RICO case and to help get Jeffrey Williams. Briefly turning to each of those counts, count 57, participation in criminal street gang activity. That is purely based on his alleged possession of marijuana and a firearm. But again, no one got up here and said Mr. Kendrick possessed any of the firearms or any of the drugs at the house. Now, here's what the state is likely to say. This is what I'm anticipating. Possession can be one of two ways, and you will hear the judge instruct you on this as well. It can be actual possession, you're holding it, or constructive possession. Constructive possession requires the state to show that Mr. Kendrick intended to possess those weapons, intended to possess those drugs. So when the state tells you that, I want you to please remember what I've just told you and think, what witnesses have you seen? What evidence has been presented that Mr. Kendrick intended to possess those weapons or those drugs or that marijuana? Nothing. Zero. Donut hole, nothing burger. The other three counts, 58, 61, 63, those are all marijuana or firearms. And again, I don't need to repeat myself. While I have had wonderful help from Ms. Hingerty and Mr. Apt on this case, for the most part, Diamante only has me up here representing him. The state has an army of prosecutors, investigators, law enforcement to assist them. So, I mean, Diamante only has David. And I just pray that I've done my best to slay this giant Goliath that is pursuing him. The state has not met their high burden of showing guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. I would even argue the state hasn't met these lower standards either. It's just not been done. I think when you go back there and deliberate, you'll come up with the same idea, the same conclusion. This case against Mr. Kendrick should have never been brought. That same Saturday night when I saw The Mentalist, a friend was saying to me, well, your problem is that the state has the last word. You're going to get up and talk to the jury, but then the state gets to go again. And they're great lawyers from the state. And they may not remember what you say. They're going to have the last word. And I said, no, you are wrong. You are wrong. The state does not have the last word. The jury has the last word. You guys have the last word. Each of you will decide the fate of Mr. Kendrick. Each of you individually will decide whether the state has met their high burden on each of these counts and on each of the elements of the counts to show that he committed this beyond a reasonable doubt. When you go back and deliberate, I believe that you can go back and send the message that targeting people, fixating on individuals who have managed to climb out of their circumstance, attacking people for their music and their lyrics and their art is wrong. Targeting only people of color for their music and lyrics is wrong. Winnie Lee, when he was on the stand, he told all of us, even though I'm a black man, not everything I write about is true or autobiographical. He has an imagination. Mr. Kendrick has an imagination. He has things to say about what he sees in the world around him, as does Winnie Lee, as does Jeffrey Williams. And the use of lyrics and artistic expression against individuals is wrong. It's un-American, and it shows the desperation of the state that they have to reach to that level in order to try to make a case against Mr. Kendrick. You can show that maybe, just maybe, we really do believe it when we tell people that through hard work, you can pull yourself up from wherever you came from. And that we, as Americans, as people, we believe in redemption. So I ask you to please remember that during and after the state's closing, to remember that when you're deliberating, to remember that each of you individually gets to make that decision of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So I'm going to ask for the sale, because that is what you're supposed to do, right? And I'm going to ask you to go back there, deliberate, and come back with not guilty verdicts for Mr. Kendrick on all the charges against him. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for the last year of your life that you sacrificed to be here and fulfill your roles as citizens. I really appreciate it.
All right, let's take a short break, which will be our last break of the day. Then we will hear from the state again. Then I will release y'all for the day. We'll come back tomorrow and give you the instructions. So let's take, maybe a 10, 15-minute break. All right, it's gonna be our last break for the day as well. Doing the argument. Where'd she go? She needs to, she's getting here.
All right. This is been a little bit. Sorry it took me so long. Man, this is God. They're late. It is 8 o'clock Central Time. It's 9 their time, and I think they're still going. So I don't know. We may get it all in a day. I think she's trying to get the jury to be able to deliberate and be done by Thanksgiving. I don't know. That's what it looks like. Let's see. Yeah, 7 or 8. It's crazy. But this happens at trials. And then the poor jury can't go anywhere. So see what's going on. Come on. Let's go. Get it on. No, don't come. No, come back. Don't leave. Well, here they come. Man, it looks like they went 12 hours today. So it looks like we got about another hour and a half. Holy moly. God dang, man. Man, that's a long night or a long day. It happens in big trials.
Thank you very much. All right, Miss Hylton.
Oh, no. No, not Miss Hylton. No. At least it ain't love. Oh, thank God.
Harsh responsibility of closing you out for the next couple of, for a little while. I'm gonna tell you how long. And I just want you all to bear with me. I just told you this morning that it was kind of like that marathon. They were kind of at that last spot, right before the finish line.
Yes, please, just end. You're killing us.
We know that we have taken you away from family,
Life,
friends,
yeah.
from work.
It's been rough.
And so we're going to ask that you just bear
I can't imagine what these people have gone through. A year for a damn case.
He said something to the effect of,
And this is the RICO. This isn't a straight murder case. It's not even straight murder.
for targeting people of color.
Oh, here we go.
Why?
Here we go.
Because I am a person of color.
No,
The majority of this prosecution team.
no, you're kidding.
And we are not targeting people of color. We are targeting gang members who decided to wreak havoc on communities in Fulton County.
Yeah.
And the ironic part of the community that they violated were those communities.
Oh, get it, girl. Oh, yeah. Show them who's boss.
Talks about the victims in this case.
Oh, yeah.
But the victims in this case, most of them are people of color. Because in Fulton County, you don't get to victimize anyone in our county without being held accountable for your actions. And what we're going to ask of you today is
Boy, could she get any more pissed off black woman in her? Man,
because they are guilty of every single crime for which they are charged.
prove it.
But as both Mr. Shard and Mr. Weinstein were talking, I was reminded that what is right is often forgotten.
I miss Mr. Weinstein's closing.
And see, in this case, for them, it's
Supper got in the way.
Tim Copeland for the murder of Jonathan Thomas. Well, we're going to talk about that doesn't even make sense.
What?
For them, it is convenient to tell you that we have not met the elements of
What?
RICO because they're just not a gang.
What is right is often forgotten for what is convenient. Whatever. I don't even know who the hell that is.
That's convenient for them, but that's not the truth. And while it may have taken some time for us to get all that evidence out here, it took a while. Some days the evidence came out good, some days the evidence came out bad, some days I had to take a couple of breaks.
Dude, people were wanting to jump off a building because of you.
YSL was a gang, YSL was an enterprise. They commit criminal street gang activity. They murdered Donovan Thomas, murdered Chanel Drakes, and they're guilty.
You're doing better than you do with the judge.
Of a story that a colleague told me a long time ago about someone who worked as a border patrol officer.
Oh God, here we go with analogies.
Border patrol officer for a number of years. And while they were working border patrol, a guy would come
Border patrol?
to the border with a red bike every day.
Oh God.
And every day that person would come through the red bike, come through with the red bike.
Ladies, stick to it and get through it. You have worn these people out.
Every day, this guy would come through. And the border patrol officer thought something was kind of fishy, but he never found anything. He always found baskets with sand inside. This happened for a few months. Well, one day, the border patrol guy was leaving that job. He was going to a new job, and he was at a bar. And who walked into the bar? The guy with the red bike. So the border patrol guy says to him,
This is the rebuttal, by the way.
But I'm interested. There's something was fishy about that red bike. What were you doing with that thing? And the guy was like, nothing. Don't worry about it. Congratulations to you. The night proceeded. The border patrol guy got some more drinks in the system. Said, you know what? Can you tell me about
Sounds like a good idea.
Something just doesn't seem right. Every time I would see the red bike, it would have sand in the basket. Tell me what was going on. Guys, don't worry about it. Finally, it's the end of the night. Border patrol guy is really complicated. He said, just tell me. I'm not going to remember what happened. You're not going to get in trouble. Tell me what you were doing. And what the guy said was, you know how every day you were focused on the basket in the sand? I was smuggling in a new red bike every single day. So you were focused on what was in the basket.
That's what the cartels always do. They get people busted at the border with 50 pounds of weed when 10,000 comes across at the same time.
So what's staying in the basket in this case? First things first, stolen jewelry.
Here we go.
Somebody stole this watch.
Yes, they did. Yeah, they did.
Left back in the house. But they want you to focus on this watch
Because you stole it. Each Richard meal is worth about $160 on the market.
Well, what she told you is she wrote her information in the affidavit. Affidavit that gets sworn before the judge.
And people lie in them.
Because the judge has to actually read that information.
And why are you even focusing on the watch? You should be focusing on the murder trial and the RICO.
Knowledge of co-conspirators. I think at one point in time, Mr. Shar said, Mr. Minor, who stabbed Lucci, he doesn't know Mr. Kendrick or Mr. Stillwell? Maybe not. But he knows Khalid Adams, who's the one who helped set up stabbing Lucci. Khalid Adams knows those two. Well, knows
6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Adams knows Garlington. And so, some way, somehow, though, Mr. Stillwell knew on February 9th that Lucci got stabbed. Well, how does he know that?
Because they talk.
How's that in a text message? That wasn't broadcast to the world.
Oh, Lord.
So this idea that just because Mr. Myrick doesn't know him specifically does not mean that they're not guilty of the crime which they could be. It's talk about witness credibility, specifically about experts and what our experts say. But if you go back to any of our experts' testimony, Gaither, Underwood,